The Opium Wars, how Britain forced China to trade drugs. The Opium Wars were one of the most devastating conflicts of the 19th century. They were not fought for land, for honor, or for survival. They were fought for drugs. Britain, desperate for profit, forced China to accept opium. This trade destroyed lives, weakened an empire, and changed world history forever. Dark ocean storm. British ships sailing, opium poppies swaying in the wind. Map of China with Canton marked. China before the wars. In the 1700s, China was powerful. It was the world's largest economy, exporting tea, silk, and porcelain. The world wanted Chinese goods, but China did not want European products. Instead, China demanded silver. Britain's silver reserves quickly drained away. Britain needed a new solution. That solution was opium. Bustling Qing dynasty markets. Tea being harvested. British silver coins being melted down. A merchant eyeing opium poppies in India. The opium trade begins. Britain grew opium in India under the control of the East India Company. They smuggled it into China, despite Chinese laws banning it. By the early 1800s, millions of Chinese people were addicted. Families were destroyed. The economy began to collapse. Opium became Britain's most profitable trade with China. For Britain, it was wealth. For China, it was ruin. Indian fields of poppies. Crates marked opium, being loaded on ships. Chinese addicts in opium dens. Charts showing trade. China fights back. The Chinese emperor saw the damage. In 1839, he sent Commissioner Lin Zexu to Canton to stop the trade. Lin demanded that British merchants hand over their opium. He destroyed more than 20,000 chests of the drug. This act sent a message. China would not be poisoned any longer, but Britain did not accept this. They sent their navy. The First Opium War had begun. Lin Zexu writing his famous letter to Queen Victoria. Burning piles of opium at Human. British officers frowning. The First Opium War, 1839 to 1842. Britain's navy was the most powerful in the world. China's military was outdated. British cannons tore through Chinese ships and fortresses. The Qing army could not match Britain's technology. After 3 years of war, China surrendered. The Treaty of Nanking was signed in 1842. China was forced to pay Britain huge sums of silver. They opened 5 ports to British trade. And most importantly, Britain took control of Hong Kong. The scenario of this war was like that. British warships firing. Chinese soldiers fleeing. Treaty signing. Map highlighting Hong Kong in British red. Now we talk about the unequal treaties. The Treaty of Nanking was the first of the unequal treaties. It marked the beginning of what China later called the Century of Humiliation. Foreign powers gained trade rights, territory, and influence. China lost sovereignty over its own economy. But the opium trade continued, and it would spark another war. To document and archive this treaty, we give these visuals. Image of treaty text. Western diplomats in Chinese courts. Map showing ports opening. That's what happened later, the Second Opium War, 1856 to 1860. In 1856, tensions erupted again. Britain wanted more trading rights. France joined as an ally. Together, they launched the Second Opium War. Once again, China's armies were no match. In 1860, British and French troops marched into Beijing. They looted and burned the emperor's summer palace, a cultural treasure. The war ended with more unequal treaties. More ports were opened. Foreigners gained new privileges. And the opium trade carried on. To document and archive the Second Opium War, we give these visuals. British and French soldiers marching. Cannons firing at Chinese forts. Summer palace burning. Treaties signed. Now let's about the human cost. The cost of the Opium Wars was enormous. China lost control of its own trade. Its people suffered from mass addiction. Opium addiction weakened families, soldiers, and leaders. For decades, China struggled under the weight of drugs and foreign control. To document and archive the human cost, we give these visuals. Opium dens, starving peasants. Qing soldiers struggling in battle, portraits of exhausted leaders. Here, we talk about the long legacy. The Opium Wars reshaped China's history. They are remembered as the start of the Century of Humiliation, a period when China was dominated by foreign powers. But the wars also reshaped global trade. Britain grew rich, using profits to expand its empire. Other Western nations demanded the same privileges in China. For China, the memory of the Opium Wars still lingers. They serve as a warning of what happens when foreign greed collides with national pride. To document and archive the long legacy, we give these visuals, maps of colonial empires expanding. British banks and factories, Chinese citizens protesting in the 20th century, modern skyline of Beijing and Shanghai rising. Finally, we give this outrow. The Opium Wars were not just about trade. They were about power, greed, and control. Britain forced a mighty empire to its knees with a drug. And the world is still living with the consequences. Conclusion visuals. 1800s. China, Britain, and opium. The Opium Wars. How Britain forced China to trade drugs.